There are moments in history that shake the world, moments when a man stands at the edge of defeat, and instead of falling, he rises. This is not a tale of power for pride. This is the story of purpose born in pain. Long before the world called him Alexander the Great, he was a young warrior who tasted failure deeper than any wound. The world laughed, his enemies celebrated, and his own men doubted him. But inside his heart, a flame still burned, a fire that whispered, "This is not where your story ends." He lost the battle, but he didn't lose himself. He fell once, but that fall became the foundation of an empire. This is not a story about a king. It's a story about every soul that has ever been broken and still dared to rise. Because sometimes the Almighty allows you to fall, not to destroy you, but to build you. And when Alexander rose again, the world would never be the same. When the sun rose over Macedonia, a young man stood on the balcony of his father's palace. His name was Alexander, and destiny had already whispered his name across the winds of time. But destiny doesn't hand greatness to anyone. It tests, it breaks, and it rebuilds. Alexander didn't know that morning that his life was about to change forever. He was only 20 years old when tragedy struck. His father, King Philip Roman II, was assassinated. In a single night, a young prince became a king. The crown felt heavier than gold. It carried the weight of responsibility, fear, and an entire empire's uncertainty. The world looked at him and said, "He's too young, too inexperienced, too soft." But Alexander looked back at the world and said, "Watch me." Every great leader faces a moment when the world doubts them. For Alexander, this was that moment. Rebellions broke out across Greece. Allies turned into enemies. Generals questioned his leadership, and yet he did not respond with anger. He responded with action. Because real kings don't speak their strength, they prove it. He called his army, men older and stronger than him, and stood before them with a calm fire in his eyes. He told them, "My father built this kingdom with his blood. I will not let it fall in fear." That day, something changed, not just in Macedonia, but in the hearts of those who followed him. They no longer saw a boy, they saw a leader chosen by courage. Alexander didn't have the luxury of time to mourn, to hesitate, or to complain. He moved quickly, he organized his armies, studied every rebellion, and planned his campaigns with precision. Where others saw chaos, he saw opportunity. Where others felt fear, he saw the hand of destiny opening a door. He understood something that separates ordinary men from kings, that leadership begins in the mind before it's proven on the battlefield. He disciplined his thoughts before commanding his soldiers. He mastered his emotions before leading armies. He knew that if he could control his heart, no enemy could ever control his fate. And when he marched toward his first battle as king, he didn't do it with arrogance. He did it with quiet faith, a faith that his purpose was greater than his pain. He looked at his men and said, "We fight not because it's easy, but because we were chosen for this." Every word carried conviction. Every step carried belief. That day, the young king set out not to prove himself to the world, but to prove himself to his destiny. And that's what separates dreamers from achievers. Dreamers wait for opportunity, but achievers march toward it with courage, even when the path is uncertain. The young Alexander didn't yet have an empire, he didn't yet have glory, but he had something more powerful, a boundless dream and an unshakable will. He was a man who believed that challenges are not curses. They are the classroom of greatness. And in that classroom, he was the most attentive student. From that moment, the boy who lost his father became the king who found his purpose. His journey had begun not with victory, but with responsibility. and he would soon learn that before conquering the world, a man must first conquer himself. When Alexander took the throne, the kingdom he inherited was not at peace, it was burning with rebellion. The moment his father's crown rested on his head, old allies turned against him. Cities rose in defiance, and whispers spread through the land that the young king would not last a year. That was his first true test, not on the battlefield, but in the test of faith, patience, and leadership. He could have sent envoys, he could have negotiated for peace, but Alexander knew that some storms are not calmed by words, they are silenced by strength. Yet his strength was not reckless. He didn't rush blindly into war. He watched, listened, and planned. He believed that every battle must first be won in the mind before it is fought on the ground. The rebellious city of Thebes was the loudest voice of defiance. They mocked his rule and declared independence. The world watched to see what this young ruler would do. Would he hesitate? Would he crumble under pressure? But Alexander was not built to bend, he was built to rise. He knew that weakness shown once would invite enemies forever. He gathered his army, men hardened by past wars, now unsure if they could trust their young leader. But when he stood before them, his presence silenced doubt. His words were not shouts of anger, they were calm, controlled, and full of conviction. Thebes may rise, he said, but we will rise higher, not through hate, but through honor. Those words became the flame that reignited the spirit of his men. When he marched toward Thebes, he did so not as a tyrant, but as a guardian of unity. He wanted to restore order, not destruction. But when Thebes refused every offer of peace, he showed the world that mercy without justice is weakness. His army moved swiftly, disciplined, and unstoppable. Thebes fell not because of its weakness, but because of Alexander's unbreakable will. The victory sent a message across Greece that the boy king had become a man of destiny. Every city that doubted him now bowed in respect. He had proven that leadership isn't inherited through blood, it is earned through decisions. He showed that when a man stands firm on what is right, even mountains bow to him. Yet, even in victory, Alexander did not gloat. He did not celebrate the fall of his enemies. He understood that every victory carries a responsibility to use power wisely. He told his men, "We win battles not to destroy, but to protect the order of our land." That is the mark of a true ruler, strength with discipline, power with purpose. This victory was more than military success. It was a spiritual awakening for Alexander. He realized that every rebellion in life, whether from people or circumstances, is a mirror that reflects our inner strength. And through Thebes, he saw his own reflection, unshaken, determined, and chosen for something greater. He had silenced doubt, not with words, but with proof. And that is a lesson for every soul striving for greatness, that people may doubt your dreams, they may rise against you. But if your heart is sincere and your mission is just, the Almighty will make your steps firm and your path clear. With Thebes behind him and Greece united under his rule, Alexander looked eastward to lands yet unconquered, to dreams yet realized. His story was only beginning, and every challenge he faced was shaping him into the legend he was destined to become. When Alexander's march to glory began, the world thought his path would be filled only with victories. But every chosen soul must first taste defeat to understand the meaning of true power. His first real test came not in Greece, but far beyond its borders, against a mighty force that refused to bow. It was in the early stages of his eastern campaign when the young king faced a defeat that would shake his pride but strengthen his spirit. As his army crossed the foreign lands, he found himself facing an enemy that outnumbered him, commanded by seasoned generals who had been fighting wars before he was even born. Alexander believed his strategy and courage would carry the day, but the reality of war is never predictable. His first defeat was not a loss of soldiers. It was a loss of balance between ambition and patience. The battle began with roaring drums and shining spears. His men charged with confidence, their hearts blazing with loyalty to their king. But the terrain was against them. The enemy lured them into unfamiliar ground, and what started as an advance turned into chaos. The formation broke. The sound of victory turned into the cries of confusion. For the first time, Alexander saw his army stumble. He did not run, he did not hide. He stood among his men, fighting like any other soldier. Yet as the dust settled, the harsh truth appeared. He had been outmaneuvered. The enemy withdrew, leaving him battered but alive. That night, as the campfire burned low, Alexander sat alone, reflecting not on his loss, but on its meaning. Every defeat, he realized, carries a divine message, not to destroy a man, but to purify him. Pride had whispered to him that he was invincible, that no sword could touch him. But defeat humbled him, reminding him that strength is not in muscles or steel, it is in wisdom and faith. He understood that even the greatest warrior needs guidance from the Almighty, and that arrogance is the doorway through which destruction enters. That night he prayed, not for revenge, but for clarity. His men watched him differently after that day. They saw a leader who could bleed and still lead, who could fall and still rise. They realized that courage is not the absence of fear or failure. It is the power to keep walking when both surround you. Alexander's silence after defeat spoke louder than any command he had ever given. The next morning he walked among his men, looked into their eyes, and said, "Yesterday we were tested. We fell, but we did not break. A man's worth is not measured by how he fights when he wins, but by how he stands after he loses." Those words restored his army's spirit more than any speech could. He turned a defeat into a school of resilience. From that day on, he began studying every mistake with the mind of a student, not the pride of a king. He mapped every weakness, every wrong move, every assumption he had made. His mind became sharper, his strategy wiser, and his discipline stronger. The fire that once burned recklessly now burned with precision. His defeat had not weakened him, it had refined him. People often see success as a straight road, but Alexander discovered that the path to greatness runs through the valley of loss. He learned that failure is not a wall, it is a mirror that shows us who we truly are. Through that reflection, he became more than a warrior, he became a visionary. And so, the young king rose again, not with anger but with understanding. He knew now that destiny favors those who learn from pain, who bend without breaking, and who believe that every setback is preparation for a greater victory ahead. The defeat that once haunted him became the foundation of his legend. The days after Alexander's defeat were quiet, but in that silence, something powerful was happening. He no longer moved with the impatience of a young king. Instead, he began to think, plan, and prepare with the patience of a man who had tasted the bitterness of loss and the hunger for redemption. Every morning he studied the maps, the winds, the terrain, not as a conqueror, but as a student of destiny. He understood that a leader who cannot learn from defeat is not ready for greatness. He gathered his commanders, the same men who had seen him fall, and instead of blaming them, he listened to them. He asked what went wrong, how they could fight smarter, how they could use wisdom instead of just courage. That humility changed everything. His men began to trust him not just as a warrior, but as a leader guided by vision. They no longer saw a boy chasing glory. they saw a man shaping history with intelligence and faith. He rebuilt his army's confidence step by step. He trained them harder, made them faster, and taught them to think beyond brute strength. Every soldier learned that discipline is stronger than rage, and patience is deadlier than pride. Alexander was no longer preparing for war, he was preparing for victory that would echo through generations. His strategies became his new weapons, sharper than any sword. He began observing how his enemies thought, not just how they fought. He realized that every commander leaves behind patterns in movement, in timing, in fear. Alexander mastered the art of predicting those patterns, turning his opponent's strengths into their traps. The same young king who once charged blindly now waited for the perfect moment to strike. When he marched again, his army could feel the change. The same man who once led from emotion now led with purpose. His eyes no longer looked for battle, they looked for opportunity. Every step, every silence, every decision was measured. And when he finally met the enemy once more, it was not the same Alexander they had defeated before. It was a transformed soul. The battle began with the same roar of swords, but this time Alexander's every move was guided by calm precision. He anticipated every counter, every ambush, every deceit. His soldiers moved like a single heartbeat, united, disciplined, unstoppable. The enemies who once saw weakness in him now saw wisdom, and wisdom is the deadliest force on a battlefield. The tide turned quickly. The same hills that once hid his defeat now echoed his victory. But this time there was no shouting, no wild celebration. Alexander stood still, watching the field in silence. He understood that true victory is not in destroying the enemy, it is in mastering oneself. What he conquered that day was not land, but his own limitations. His men looked at him with awe, but he reminded them, it was not my hand that brought this victory, but the lessons Allah allowed me to learn through defeat. His humility lifted their hearts more than pride ever could. They realized that a man guided by gratitude and wisdom becomes unstoppable because his purpose is pure. In that victory, Alexander proved that defeat is never the end of a great soul. It is only the beginning of understanding. He learned that success built on ego collapses quickly, but success built on discipline and humility lasts forever. His name began to spread again, not as a reckless conqueror, but as a wise and noble leader. The young king who had once fallen now walked as a living example of strength through patience, power through understanding, and triumph through faith. His revenge was not against his enemies, it was against his own weakness. And that victory made him truly great. After his first great victory following defeat, Alexander's heart carried a quiet fire. He did not celebrate through pride, but through resolve. He remembered the faces of those who once mocked his fall, the armies that had defeated him, and the lands that had turned their backs when he was weak. But his revenge was not fueled by hatred. It was driven by a sense of justice, by the desire to show that no failure can bury a man chosen for greatness. He wanted the world to know that true kings rise from the ashes of defeat stronger than ever before. As he prepared for his next campaign, Alexander no longer acted out of emotion. He planned with precision, prayed for wisdom, and led with purpose. His every command was measured, his every strategy shaped by the lessons of the past. Where before he had relied on his strength, now he relied on his discipline. Where before he had sought to conquer, now he sought to correct. His focus was not on destruction, it was on restoring balance and reclaiming honor. When he began his march toward the enemy that had once defeated him, the air itself followed with silent confidence. They no longer doubted him, for they had seen the transformation in their leader. He had learned patience, and patience had made him powerful. His soldiers no longer feared death, for they were led by a man who had already faced failure and conquered it. The enemy underestimated him once more. They believed the same young ruler would rush into battle as before. But Alexander waited. He let them exhaust their pride, let them believe they had control. Then, at the right moment, he struck, not in fury, but with the calmness of a man who knew that victory is written by those who master themselves. His army moved like a living storm, swift, disciplined, and unstoppable. When the enemy's lines broke, Alexander did not chase them with vengeance. He stood firm, his eyes steady, his heart unshaken. The men who once defeated him now knelt before him, and he offered them mercy. That mercy was his greatest weapon. It crushed their arrogance more than any sword could. They saw not a conqueror, but a man of justice. And justice always earns respect where fear cannot. His victory spread across nations like fire carried by the wind. But he remained humble, reminding his people that success is a trust, not a trophy. He taught that revenge through hatred leads to destruction, but revenge through excellence leads to peace. His words echoed in every camp. Do not fight because you hate your enemies. Fight because you must protect what is right. Those words turned warriors into believers in purpose, not pride. In the lands he reclaimed, he built not monuments of gold, but systems of order. He brought peace where there was chaos and fairness where there was corruption. The people who once resisted him began to call him their protector. They saw in him the rare strength of a ruler who conquered hearts after conquering lands. Every night, Alexander would look at the stars and reflect. He knew that his success was not his own. And it was a gift, a responsibility, a divine trust. He had learned that true revenge is not to destroy what hurt you, but to become greater than what once defeated you. His humility deepened with every victory. His character strengthened with every challenge. As his empire grew, so did his vision. He no longer saw himself as a king of one land, but as a guardian of unity and justice. He wanted his name to be remembered not for the battles he fought, but for the peace he built afterward. His revenge had been fulfilled not through anger, but through wisdom, faith, and the strength to rise when others would have fallen. His journey became a living testament that defeat does not define destiny, and revenge, when purified through patience and wisdom, can become the foundation of greatness. Every nation that heard his name knew this truth. A man guided by divine purpose can turn his pain into power and his failures into fuel for an everlasting legacy. After reclaiming his honor and rebuilding his empire, Alexander realized that victory on the battlefield was only half the journey. The greater conquest was over hearts and minds. He had witnessed kingdoms fall not because of weak armies, but because of divided souls. He knew that if he wanted his empire to last, he needed to unite his people under principles stronger than steel: justice, loyalty, and trust. His mission was no longer to expand by war, but to strengthen by wisdom. He began traveling across his conquered lands, not as a distant ruler, but as a listener. He walked among soldiers, farmers, and scholars alike, hearing their struggles and learning from their experiences. His humility astonished even his closest generals. To them, he said, "A king who cannot hear the pain of his people does not deserve their loyalty." Those words began to spread, transforming fear of his name into love for his rule. He built roads that connected cities, not just for trade, but for unity. He encouraged his soldiers to marry into local families, not to dominate, but to integrate. The blend of cultures and traditions gave birth to a new kind of empire, one that celebrated diversity while standing firm in discipline and order. His vision was not of one people ruling another, but of all people standing together under a just hand. He created centers of learning where scholars from different lands came together to share knowledge. Science, philosophy, and art flourished under his protection. He saw wisdom as a form of power that could outlast any sword. An empire built by war will fade. He once said, but an empire built on knowledge will guide generations. Those who once saw him as a conqueror began to see him as a teacher. His leadership was firm but fair. When governors or generals misused power, he replaced them without hesitation, no matter how close they were to him. He believed that loyalty without righteousness was dangerous. His justice system became known across lands for its balance, punishing corruption yet rewarding honesty. People began to say that under Alexander's rule, even the weak could sleep without fear. He never allowed his soldiers to become arrogant. He reminded them constantly that their victories were not for pride but for purpose. When they returned from battle, he forbade them from celebrating in arrogance. Instead, he would gather them and remind them to thank the Almighty for their safety and success. That discipline created a brotherhood stronger than any chain of command. In times of peace, he worked to heal the scars left by war. He rebuilt villages, restored farmlands, and ensured that widows and orphans were cared for. He believed that the true sign of a great empire is not how much land it controls, but how it treats the weakest within it. These acts of compassion gave him more loyalty than any battle victory ever could. Alexander also began to rely more on counsel and wisdom. He surrounded himself with advisors who dared to speak truth, not flattery. He understood that even a king can make mistakes, and that humility in leadership is not weakness, it is strength. His willingness to listen made his empire stronger because decisions were guided by justice, not ego. His army, once a collection of soldiers from different nations, became a single family bound by respect and unity. They saw themselves not just as conquerors, but as protectors of a vision. Wherever they went, they carried not just the banner of Alexander, but the values he taught them: discipline, fairness, and mercy. Over time, his empire became known not just for its size, but for its stability. People spoke of him with reverence, not fear. They admired how he transformed from a fiery warrior into a wise ruler who conquered not by force, but by understanding. His strength no longer came from his sword, it came from his heart, and that is what made his empire endure long after his battles ended. As Alexander's empire grew vast and powerful, new challenges began to rise from within. Betrayal, jealousy, and hidden ambition crept into the hearts of those closest to him. The same men who once fought by his side began whispering in shadows, blinded by greed and power. Alexander, who had conquered distant kingdoms, now faced the hardest war of all, the war within his own circle. This battle would not be fought with swords, but with wisdom, patience, and the strength to stand alone if he had to. He began noticing the signs of deception, the delayed reports, the false praises, the uneasy silences when he entered a room. But instead of reacting with rage, he watched quietly. He had learned that the truth reveals itself with time, and wisdom lies in silence more than in confrontation. He started testing loyalty in subtle ways, assigning responsibilities that exposed the hearts of his followers. Some proved faithful, others showed their corruption when they thought no one was watching. When the truth unfolded, Alexander was heartbroken. Among the traitors was a man he once called brother, someone who had shared food, battles, and victories with him. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade ever could, but instead of seeking revenge in anger, Alexander chose to act with calm justice. He knew that emotions could cloud judgment, and that a ruler must never let pain decide the fate of others. He listened, verified, and only then delivered his verdict. When he confronted the betrayers, his tone was not filled with rage, but with disappointment. "You stood beside me when I was weak," he said, "and you turned against me when I was strong. But remember, betrayal harms the soul more than it hurts the target." His words struck their hearts with more force than punishment could. Even those who betrayed him felt the weight of his composure and righteousness. His soldiers watched how he handled the situation. They saw that true strength is not in destroying those who wrong you, but in rising above them with dignity. Alexander's restraint taught them that justice is more powerful than vengeance. He ordered that those guilty of treachery be dealt with fairly. No cruelty, no excess. He wanted justice to be an example, not a spectacle. His mercy stunned even his enemies, who realized that his rule was guided not by ego, but by a deep sense of moral duty. After the betrayal, Alexander gathered his commanders and spoke from his heart. He told them that every empire falls not from outside attacks, but from the cracks formed within. He reminded them that loyalty is not built on fear or rewards, but on shared purpose and mutual respect. He encouraged them to speak honestly, to correct him if ever he strayed from justice. His humility rebuilt the bond that betrayal had tried to destroy. He also reflected deeply on himself. He asked where he had gone wrong, if power had distanced him from those who once stood by him sincerely. It was in those moments of reflection that he grew even wiser. He understood that leadership requires not just strength and vision, but constant self-awareness. He made it his habit to stay connected to his soldiers, to sit among them, listen to their stories, and make them feel seen. That restored their trust in him more than any decree could. The lesson of betrayal changed the way he ruled. He became more cautious in choosing those who surrounded him, valuing character over skill, honesty over flattery. He realized that great men fall not because of the enemy in front of them, but because of the deceit behind them. This awareness became his shield, protecting him from future treachery and keeping his rule strong. As news of the betrayal spread across the empire, people expected chaos, revenge, and blood. Instead, they saw order, fairness, and peace. Alexander's justice became legendary. People said, "He does not rule from emotion, he rules from wisdom." The strength of his mercy inspired others to act righteously, knowing that their king lived by principles, not by pride. Through betrayal, Alexander discovered that power reveals true hearts, both of friends and of himself. He had every reason to lose faith in people, yet he chose to strengthen his faith in the Almighty's plan. He learned that betrayal is not the end. It is a divine test to separate the sincere from the false. From that test, Alexander emerged greater, wiser, and more unshakable than ever before. After the storm of betrayal passed, Alexander sat alone under the vast sky, realizing that victory on the battlefield was nothing compared to conquering one's own ego. For years, he had marched across continents, won countless wars, and stood undefeated before kings and armies. But now he began to ask himself, what was all this power for if it didn't lead to peace within? That moment of silence was his awakening. He understood that the true legacy of a ruler isn't measured in lands conquered, but in hearts uplifted and justice maintained. He started to see leadership not as a throne, but as a trust, a sacred responsibility given by the Almighty to test a man's patience, mercy, and character. The more he reflected, the more he realized that the higher a man rises, the greater his accountability becomes. He began to walk among his soldiers again, to share their meals, listen to their worries, and remind them that every victory they achieved was not just by sword, but by unity and divine favor. His presence among them rekindled a sense of brotherhood that had once made his army unstoppable. When he spoke to his generals, his tone was different, softer, wiser, yet more commanding than ever. He no longer spoke of conquering new lands, he spoke of building something eternal. An empire built on arrogance will crumble. He told them, but one built on justice and humility will outlive us all. Those words echoed in the hearts of his men because they came from a man who had seen power, tasted betrayal, and still chose righteousness over revenge. As he traveled through the lands he had once conquered, he began to look not for riches or gold, but for signs of peace and prosperity among the people. When he saw injustice, he corrected it personally. When he saw hunger, he ordered food to be distributed from his own treasury. He wanted his people to remember him not as a conqueror, but as a protector, one who fought not for his name, but for the stability and honor of his people. His reflection made him realize that no matter how vast his empire became, time would eventually erase every wall, every palace, every monument. The only thing that would live on was his example, how he treated others, how he forgave, how he remained steadfast in truth. This realization made him more humble. He no longer craved the cheers of crowds or the fear of enemies. He sought the quiet approval of his conscience and the pleasure of his Creator. In his solitude, he began to write letters and journals, not for historians or future kings, but as reminders to himself. He wrote about patience, about how pride blinds a ruler, and about how faith must be the compass guiding every decision. These writings became his mirror, reflecting the man he wanted to become, one whose power was tempered by wisdom, and whose victories were guided by divine will, not personal desire. Even his closest companions noticed the change in him. The same Alexander who once led armies through storms now found peace in silence. He would stand at sunrise and watch the light spread across the land, whispering prayers of gratitude. His men saw him less as a warrior now and more as a sage, a man who had learned that greatness without gratitude is emptiness disguised as success. As his fame spread across nations, other rulers began to respect him not only for his strength, but for his justice. They sent emissaries not out of fear, but out of admiration. They knew that when Alexander gave his word, he kept it not because of political strategy, but because his integrity demanded it. His humility made his empire stronger than his sword ever could. He began to teach his successors that leadership must begin with self-mastery. You cannot rule others, he said, until you rule your own heart. He reminded them that anger destroys clarity, pride blinds wisdom, and greed poisons peace. He wanted them to understand that power without moral balance becomes a curse, and that only through humility can a leader protect both his people and his soul. When he looked back at his journey, the wars, the victories, the betrayals, he finally understood the divine wisdom behind it all. Every loss had purified his purpose, every trial had molded his strength, every moment of pain had prepared him for deeper understanding. And in that understanding, Alexander found the greatest victory of all, not over nations, but over himself. As Alexander entered the final years of his reign, the fire of endless conquest within him began to soften into the light of reflection. He had walked across continents, faced kings, and reshaped empires, yet his heart now sought something far greater than territory. He longed for meaning. Standing on the edge of his empire, he would gaze across lands once filled with war, now breathing in peace, and wonder if this was what he had been fighting for all along. The roar of battle had faded, replaced by the quiet whispers of destiny and the echo of his own thoughts. He began to gather his most trusted commanders, not to plan invasions, but to teach them the lessons life had carved into him. Strength, he told them, isn't measured by how many lands we conquer, but by how many hearts we unite. Those words came from a man who had witnessed the emptiness of victory when unaccompanied by justice. His soldiers, once motivated by glory, now listened in reverence to a king who spoke of peace and purpose. The battlefield that once defined him had become a classroom for wisdom. The people of his vast empire began to see a different side of their ruler. He visited cities not to command, but to understand. He walked among the poor and asked about their needs. He sat with scholars to discuss philosophy and faith. His rule, once marked by fear and admiration, was now carried by compassion and fairness. Alexander realized that the foundation of an everlasting empire isn't stone or steel. It's the contentment of its people. Justice became his strongest weapon, and mercy his greatest armor. He ordered that no city under his rule should be deprived of food or safety. He built schools, libraries, and places of learning, believing that knowledge was the true inheritance of a strong nation. His mind shifted from conquest to cultivation, from taking to giving. He wanted his empire to stand as a symbol of enlightenment, where every man could rise by his virtue, not his birth. This transformation from conqueror to caretaker earned him a kind of respect that no army could command. Yet even as his greatness grew, so did his awareness of mortality. The man who once believed himself invincible began to feel the weight of time. In the quiet of his tent, he would sometimes hold his sword and reflect on how many lives it had changed, for better or worse. He began to pray more often, to ask for forgiveness for the pain his wars had caused, and to seek peace with his Creator. It was in those silent prayers that Alexander found a strength far greater than any he had known on the battlefield. When illness struck his camp, he refused to rest while his men suffered. He personally walked among the sick, comforting them, ensuring they had care and food. The soldiers saw not a distant king, but a brother in arms who shared their struggles. His humility melted the last barriers of pride that separated him from his people. That bond, born not of fear but of love, became the final proof of his transformation. In his final campaign, he spoke not of expansion but of unity. If we are to rule the world, he said, let it be through justice, not through fear. He knew that the empire he had built would one day pass into other hands, but he wanted its spirit, the spirit of strength guided by righteousness, to endure beyond him. His army, once hungry for conquest, now marched under a banner of peace, inspired by the wisdom of their king. As his health began to fade, his closest companions gathered around him, weeping for the man who had led them through deserts and storms. But Alexander, calm and composed, told them not to mourn. Every man must return to his Lord, he whispered, but what matters is what we leave behind. He urged them to lead with justice, to remember that their power was a trust, and that arrogance would destroy everything they had built. His final moments were filled not with fear, but with faith. When news of his passing spread, the world mourned not just a warrior, but a visionary. The nations he once conquered now prayed for him, for they remembered his fairness more than his sword. He had entered the world as a conqueror, but he left it as a reformer, a man who learned that the greatest victory is to overcome one's own pride and return to humility. His name lived on, not as a symbol of war, but as a testament to transformation. The empire he left behind carried the marks of his journey, scars of war, yes, but also seeds of wisdom. The cities he built continued to flourish with trade, learning, and cultural exchange. Generations remembered him as the king who turned conquest into compassion and power into purpose. In the end, Alexander's revenge against defeat was not another battle, it was redemption. It was the story of a man who began with fire, but ended with light. In every corner of history, there are names that refuse to fade, names carved not just in stone, but in the hearts of those who study greatness. Among them stands Alexander, a young king who refused to be defined by defeat. His story doesn't begin with victory, it begins with a fall, a test so crushing that most men would have surrendered to despair. But not him. For him, failure was not the end, it was the awakening. His heart burned with the desire to rise, not for vengeance alone, but to prove that destiny bends only to those who never quit. When people heard of his first defeat, many believed his journey was over. The whispers of doubt followed him like shadows. Yet, instead of running from his failure, he studied it. He dissected every mistake, every weakness, every flaw that led to his fall. He refused to allow pride to blind him. His defeat became his greatest teacher. That humility to learn from what broke him became the foundation of his future strength. His silence in those days was not surrender, it was strategy. He withdrew from the noise of the world and rebuilt himself in solitude. In his quiet moments, he envisioned not just revenge, but redemption. He began to train harder, think sharper, and plan deeper than ever before. He surrounded himself with loyal commanders who believed not in his throne, but in his vision. Every sunrise reminded him that pain was temporary, but purpose was eternal. His spirit grew tougher, his mind became sharper, and his faith in his destiny deepened with every passing day. When the time came to return to the battlefield, he was no longer the same man. The one who had once fought with emotion now fought with precision. His army felt that change in him, a calm fire, an unshakable resolve. Before every march, he reminded them, "We fight not for pride, but for honor. We rise not for revenge, but for truth." Those words ignited hearts stronger than any sword ever could. His soldiers began to see their mission as a cause, not a conquest. The day of reckoning arrived under the blazing sun. The same enemy who had once mocked his defeat now trembled at the sight of his disciplined army. The battle began, and this time Alexander's strategy unfolded like a masterpiece. Every move, every counterattack, every formation reflected the wisdom born from his first failure. He turned the tide of war through patience, courage, and flawless command. The same ground that once witnessed his loss now echoed with his triumph. But victory did not fill his heart with arrogance. Standing among the fallen, he remembered his own defeat and how it had shaped him. He prayed quietly, thanking the Almighty for giving him strength through adversity. That moment showed his men that greatness does not lie in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. His mercy towards his enemies after the war became legendary. He offered them peace instead of humiliation, a gesture that turned foes into followers. As news of his victory spread across lands, kings trembled and poets sang his name. Yet the man himself remained grounded. He often said the crown weighs lighter when worn with humility. He refused to be carried away by the praises of men. He visited the families of the soldiers who had fallen, offered them comfort, and honored their sacrifice. This empathy made his people love him even more deeply than they feared him. Years later, when people asked him what changed after that war, he would simply smile and say, "Everything." He had not only reclaimed his lost glory, but discovered the true meaning of leadership. The young warrior who once sought revenge had become a wise ruler who sought justice. He learned that true victory comes when the heart remains pure despite power, and when one remembers the purpose behind every struggle. The empire that rose from that victory was built on discipline, faith, and resilience. Alexander made sure his people thrived in peace as much as they had fought in war. He established systems of education, trade, and defense that strengthened his kingdom for generations. The land that once knew battle now flourished with prosperity and order. His transformation became an example for all rulers that power is safest in the hands of the humble. In the end, Alexander's first defeat became the cornerstone of his immortality. Had he never fallen, he might never have grown. Had he never been broken, he might never have learned compassion. His story lives not as a tale of war, but as a reminder to every human being that when life brings you to your knees, you are only one decision away from rising again, stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. Years passed and empires rose where there was once dust. The same world that once mocked his defeat now spoke his name with reverence. But the true victory was not the land he conquered. It was the heart he transformed. He learned that the greatest empire a man can rule is his own soul. And when he returned to his creator, he left behind not just monuments of stone, but a legacy of faith, resilience, and honor. His message still whispers through time: fall if you must, but rise as if destiny itself depends on you.